So it's a great honour to be here today, and I thank the organisers so much for inviting me. It's a lovely opportunity to actually step back and reflect on your journey. We're all in such a state of busyness, especially with COVID. And for me, you know, having just turned 50 and having had a very non-linear science and research journey, which I'm going to share with you, it's been a really lovely opportunity. So for me, I have always been extremely passionate about child health and global child health. And the journey that I'm going to take you on today is much more of a public health journey. I think you've heard some lovely, inspiring talks about particularly more laboratory-based science and research. And now I'm going to take you out of that much more into the public health realm. And the focus of my work, well, has really always been around vaccine research and immunisation for the last 15 to 20 years, but particularly around how we use vaccines. And for me, now the focus is on vaccine confidence, building vaccine confidence, acceptance and demand. But for me, I'm just going to take you back a little bit for where it started for me. So this photo I've popped up this during medical school. So I did medicine at Melbourne University starting in 1989, and I had a fantastic time in the first few years of medicine. I basically just scraped through, only just passed all my subjects, and at the end of third year I decided to go overseas and have a gap year. And I'm deliberately highlighting this because one of the themes of my talk, I hope, is that you can take your time. There is no rush. This is a long journey, and actually there's no end because you're always exploring, you're always learning. So for me, this was my first major foray out of medicine, and I travelled with my good friend Chris, and we had a gap year, and we travelled in the US and Europe, and I went to Africa at the end. And it was one of the most invigorating things that I've done. And then, of course, I got to the end of medical school, and I put this up because this was on our graduation day. And I love it because these are still my closest friends today, and I'm sure the same it will be said for you in your journey through whatever degree you're doing, and through medicine and through research. You make lifelong friends. And then after finishing medical school, I decided that I absolutely wanted to do paediatrics. And this was very clear to me right from the first moment that I did paediatrics in fifth year medicine. I loved kids, I loved their joy, the fact that they would get up and run around the ward as soon as they were well. There was no malingering. They just are an absolute pleasure and joy to work with. So I went to the Royal Children's Hospital as a resident, and I've pretty much never left. I will talk about some of my other journey, but I'm still working there 25 years later. And it's an absolute privilege and a joy for me. I'm a general paediatrician on the ward at the Royal Children's Hospital. I'm one of the inpatient units. So my clinical work is a mixture of inpatient medicine as well as outpatient medicine, and it really does inform everything we do. And I work in the immunisation service, in the clinical service there, and get to speak with families and patients every week around their vaccination decisions. And that really has informed and sort of powered the research that I've done. But it was in my first year of advanced training, I hadn't really considered research before, and I actually answered an email that Professor Jonathan Karapetis, who's now the leader of the Telethon Kids Institute, posted advertising a PhD. And I remember the day I read that and I thought, wow, that sounds like a really exciting project. And that was literally my entrance into research, was just, it completely captured my imagination. And so that concept around serendipity and just taking opportunities as they come, I think is really powerful. So that a particular project was looking at the burden of group A streptococcal disease in families to inform future group A strep vaccine development. And that was my step into research. And for me, an incredibly powerful journey into research. And I was very privileged to have an amazing supervisor and mentor in Jonathan, who really inspired my love of research and my love of science. And then I finished my paediatrics degree, again with some lifelong friends that you can see there, and decided at the end of my PhD, I overlapped my last 2 years of advanced training with my PhD, that we would go overseas and do a fellowship. So again, the theme of travelling overseas and taking opportunities to expand your horizons, meet new people. So we went to Toronto for 12 months, where I was fortunate to be the first ever general paediatric fellow at the Hospital for Sick Children that was allowed to work part-time. And their definition of part-time was 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, which I thought was hilarious, given we had a 6-monther and a 2-year-old, and little kids really don't understand if you're completely gone for 2 weeks versus at home for 2 weeks. But anyway, it was a concession that they let me be a part-time fellow. And it was a real journey and an experience for us with little children to be living and working overseas. I had a fantastic experience as a clinical fellow in Toronto. And it was also the time that I was writing up my PhD. So in those 2 weeks off, I would actually lock myself in the basement, because every house in Toronto has a basement, -20, there's always a lot of snow gear down there. And I would write, and I wrote solidly for sort of 2-week periods, and then I would go back and do my clinical work. And in that sort of second 6 months of our year in Canada, I actually handed my PhD in, which was a huge achievement, and again was also due to incredible support from my husband Dave, who was really sort of inspiring me the whole way to just get it in and get it done. And then in our second year in Canada, I actually decided not to do any clinical work at all. So I actually took 18 months off, and we had our 3rd child. And that's another theme that I really wanted to sort of highlight to you. Obviously, in your journey, it's really important to think now about how you're going to combine family, research and clinical work. And for me, I took 18 months off. I decided that second year in Canada, we moved to Vancouver. I would have a great time with the kids, spent my life at ScienceWorks and roaming around Vancouver, and just enjoyed being a mum. And then came back, had our 3rd baby, and then was able to get back into starting my postdoc. So we had a fantastic time in Canada, and I know other speakers have spoken about this, but it's really a great opportunity to think about going overseas, travelling and expanding your horizons. And then fortunately, I was able to come back and attend my PhD ceremony, which was very exciting. And then I started my postdoctoral period. So I had done my research in Group A strep, and then I came back and started with the rotavirus vaccine program at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, which was led by Professor Julie Bynes, and was building on the incredible work of Professor Ruth Bishop. And this is a real story at MCRI of now over 40 years of research into developing a new rotavirus vaccine. And for me, again, it was a beautiful combination of clinical work, because we'd all looked after children with severe dehydrating gastroenteritis on the ward from rotavirus, and seen their beautiful response when they rehydrated and they're well. But unfortunately, not all children globally have the opportunity to have rehydration and care in a hospital setting, and die from dehydrating gastroenteritis. So hence, what a privilege it was to work on that program in the rotavirus vaccine clinical trials to develop an oral neonatal rotavirus vaccine for the global community. So that was really my job. As a postdoc, was to run the rotavirus vaccine clinical trials of the 2nd generation RV3 vaccine. The top picture up there is the rotavirus vaccine clinical trial that we ran in Melbourne. And you can see Professor Ruth Bishop there in the middle, who was just an absolute joy and a pleasure to work with. And she actually discovered rotavirus. So you can imagine how inspiring it is to work with a researcher like that in your team. But we also ran clinical trials in New Zealand and in Indonesia, and I ran some other work, which is my team up there, which was the maternal antibodies study, looking at why rotavirus vaccines weren't as effective in low and middle income settings, and that was most likely due to maternal antibody interference. So that was my maternal antibodies team. And that was an incredibly exciting period of my life running those trials. But I was also trying to search within vaccinology for my own niche. Did I want to run clinical trials for the rest of my career? Was that what I wanted to do? Did I want to focus on rotavirus or Group A strep? Where did my passion lie? And I don't know whether any of you saw this, but this came out in 2013, and this was a documentary that Sonia Pemberton from Gene Pool made, and it was around the anti-vax movement and the influence of Andrew Wakefield and what happened globally in terms of the MMR vaccine once he published his paper in The Lancet. And I was completely and utterly transfixed that we could have such incredible vaccines globally that were not being used. And it sort of became so patently clear to me that it was vaccination that saved lives, not vaccines. And so really started my journey, my quest to try and improve vaccine decision-making, vaccine acceptance and confidence in vaccines, because millions of dollars are spent globally on making vaccines, but if we're not using them, then we're not actually making the most of this extraordinary resource. It also became very clear to me that there were many vaccine-preventable diseases that were increasing globally because of the lack of use of vaccines, particularly measles, which is the top left-hand corner. The middle one is meningococcal meningitis, and then, of course, pertussis. And these diseases come back, and there are resurgences of them. And it's not all due to vaccine refusal, but it certainly plays a huge role. And in 2019, there was actually a 300% increase in measles cases globally. And it was just before the World Health Organization actually announced that vaccine hesitancy was one of the top 10 threats to global health. And it was at this point that I really ventured into the whole science around and the psychology of vaccine decision-making. And I put this up here because, and this is never more pertinent now than with the situation with risk communication and COVID vaccines that we're all living. There are many things that we all do, whether it goes swimming in the ocean for fear of a shark attack, the risk of which is about 1 in 12.5 million, or if we get in a plane, the risk of a plane crash is about 1 in 1.2 million. The risk of a car crash is actually about 1 in 5,000. The risk of getting a clot from the AstraZeneca vaccine is 1 in 30 to 50,000. And yet we're far more likely to fear a blood clot from the AstraZeneca vaccine than we are to get in our car and drive home from this session. And so what is that? What's at play there? What it actually is it's called heuristics, or mental shortcuts that we all make when we're trying to interpret risk. And this particular risk is called availability bias. So if you actually see something frightening and scary and it's ever present or amplified in the media, which is what we've seen with the clotting syndrome, then we're much more likely to overinterpret that risk. The second cognitive bias that we're all very familiar with is this omission bias, where if we see something frightening or scary and we don't know what to do with it, we choose to do nothing. And what's tragic about that is, in fact, we avoid an action of which has a low risk associated with it, and we choose nothing or inaction, which has a much higher risk. And so making people aware of these heuristics or mental shortcuts is so important in our decision making, so that we can understand and how we interpret risk. And so this has been really incorporated into a lot of work that we've been doing to try and increase vaccine acceptance. So obviously what we're really trying to do is to help people to reshape facts and to change their mindset and their decision making, so that in fact facts are not conflicting with their beliefs and being rejected, but they're being reshaped to improve acceptance. And so only about 18 months ago, I started my own group at MCRI, the Vaccine Uptake Group, and you can see a small group of us there trying to celebrate last year in COVID when we were able to get together in person. But it's been an extraordinary journey, and I really get so much pleasure with working with these incredibly bright and amazing postdocs, PhD students, research assistants, and Darren from our research group is actually here today, so it's an absolute joy to have him here as well. But the other aspect of this work, of course, is that it's been an amazing experience for me to step onto the global stage, to work very closely with the World Health Organization, with UNICEF. And one of the consultancies that I did for WHO was to actually travel to the Philippines after they had the dengue vaccine crisis. You may not recall, but in 2019, There were a number of deaths from the dengue vaccine in young children. And what actually happened then was there was a huge backlash in the community, and parents stopped vaccinating against all vaccine-preventable diseases, and there was a huge increase in measles. So we were asked to go over there and run a workshop with the government, with paediatricians, with nurses and members of the public to try and develop a strategy to improve vaccine confidence in the routine immunisation EPI schedule. And it's been incredibly effective, the work that we did there. And of course, my experience at WHO has also been part of a group called the Global Vaccine Demand Hub, and I've had the opportunity to work with researchers from all over the world and make extraordinary connections. And these are my strongest collaborators, almost more than the people I work with nationally in Australia. Saad Omer is the director of the Global Health Program at Yale University and one of my strongest collaborators. And this is one of the exciting aspects with research are some of these global collaborations and connections that you form. So in terms of vaccine uptake, I just thought I'd briefly draw your attention to this, which is really the model of the way we think about vaccine acceptance. And this is a WHO model that's been led by Julie Leask. And it's so relevant now with COVID vaccination, because what it tells us is that the way people think and feel about vaccination and the social processes that underpin vaccination, meaning vaccine recommendations, healthcare provider support, trust in vaccines, that all influences our motivation or our willingness to accept a vaccine. But it's still those practical issues or those access issues. How do you get to the clinic? What is transport available to you? How many children do you have? Can you get out of work? All those practical issues with the COVID vaccination now. How do I make an appointment? What's the number to call? How long do I have to wait? In fact, those practical issues actually have much more of an impact on vaccine uptake. And yet you will hear with the media that everything around uptake of vaccines is all framed around hesitancy. So it's really important, if we're going to tailor effective solutions, no matter what vaccine you're talking about across the lifespan, we need to be able to understand what those drivers or barriers to vaccination are. And so we are, in our research, we've been able to develop a number of interventions for high-risk groups, whether it's for maternal immunisation, childhood immunisation, for children with developmental disabilities in the special school setting. And really, this is just a model to show you, this is based on the socio-ecological model of some of those targets that we have to think about at all levels of the system to ensure that we can develop effective strategies for vaccine uptake. And this is just one of the programs of work that we've been leading around maternal vaccination called the Mum Bub Vax project. And as I said, this has been done as part of a global collaboration with Saad Omer. And this program is now being adapted in Canada, and they're about to start a trial in Vancouver of this intervention. When it comes to COVID vaccine uptake, it's been an incredible privilege and honour to work very closely with government, both the Victorian state government and the Commonwealth government, around strategies. I sit on the third COVID ATAGI working group on vaccine safety, confidence and evaluation. And our group, the Collaboration on Social Science and Immunisation, which I chair, prepared a document for ATAGI to inform some of the government strategy around vaccine uptake. And really, as I was highlighting before from the WHO model, just very much being aware of all of the drivers of vaccination, the acceptance issues and the access barriers. As part of the last few months in terms of supporting the Victorian COVID vaccine strategy, one of the things that we've done to build vaccine confidence is to engage with the public and with the community to answer questions around the COVID vaccines. And this was a Q&A session that was led by the Doherty, by Sharon Lewin and her team. And there were a number of us that were on the panel. We had about 100 or so people in the room and a couple of I think there were about 1,000 people online, and it was moderated by Michael Rowland from the ABC, and a real opportunity for an hour and a half or 2 hours to just answer people's questions about the vaccines, to really stop labelling people as hesitant and accept that it's quite reasonable to have questions and to address them. And I think these sorts of public forums, town halls, are so critically important in terms of really building confidence in vaccination. One of the other areas that I engage with more broadly around science communication and the media is through a blog that I lead, or did lead, at the Children's Hospital. It's sort of morphed into a podcast now. It was called the Dr. Margie blog, and I started this in around 2015. And these were initially written blogs, and then I did more video blogs around common child health issues. And this was another fantastic way to bring research and science into educating and informing the public around important sort of child health topics, things from anxiety, mental health issues, constipation. It didn't matter what we were looking at. It was a real opportunity to engage the scientific community and to communicate that with the public. We were really fortunate to get a huge reach from some of these videos, and in fact a flu video that I did, that was just a 3-minute video explaining how a young child had been severely affected by influenza because she hadn't been vaccinated, actually reached over 1 million people and had over 300,000 views. And it's incredible just how powerful stories are, and that's really what I want to convey, is this combination of science and story. Another thing that I've been involved with at the hospital is the RCH Kids Health Info podcast, which I do with my 2 paediatric colleagues, Lexi Frydenberg and Anthea Rhodes. And again, this is an incredible opportunity to discuss really important child health topics informed by the research, and to communicate the science and the evidence-based findings with the community. And I just wanted to highlight this as part of the COVID work that I've been doing. I was fortunate to be nominated and win an award for the Melbourne Health Network around leadership with the media for COVID vaccination this year. And I just highlight this because I think I would really encourage you, if you go down this path, to think about how you communicate science and learn science communication skills and the different social media platforms, because it's just as important to communicate the science to have impact as it is to do the work. Unfortunately, in these days and age, in this sort of day and age, people don't always have the time to read papers in great detail. So vehicles such as Twitter are incredibly powerful to convey your findings, to link people to your papers. So being aware, I mean, I'm probably speaking to the converted, you're all on social media, but to think about it very much also as a research tool as well is really important. And the middle picture was me earlier this year, which was a very proud moment at Government House, receiving a Churchill Fellowship to travel internationally with some of these global health organisations to really get more expertise around risk communication. And the top picture is with my eldest daughter, Liv. She came along when I was fortunate enough to get that award, which again is another proud moment to bring your family into some of your achievements, because they all travel this journey with us. And then I just wanted to finish on this last collaboration that I'm part of. Another role that I have is I'm the Director of Clinician-Scientist Pathways in the Melbourne Medical School. And this is a real joy and a pleasure for me, because at this time in my career, I really want to encourage and foster leadership, particularly for women at my stage of my career, but also for them coming through. And this is a new group that we have formed, which is the Women in Clinical Academic Leadership sort of community of practice. And we held our first event last year, and we had nearly 800 people online. Unfortunately, it was online because of COVID. But this was a fantastic experience to really talk about the challenges, particularly for women, of combining a scientific career with clinical work and clinical medicine. So if you'd like to get involved, you can have a look on the Melbourne Medical School website. So my last pearls in terms of what do clinician scientists need to thrive. And I really love this image because I have felt like this along my clinician scientist journey so many times, that you really just need someone to nurture you, water you, steer you in the right direction. So the first thing I would say is you do need really good, powerful mentors. You need people to support and guide you. But just as important as having a good mentor is having sponsorship. Because sometimes what you need is just a seat at the table, someone to recommend you for that talk, for that conference, to give you that leg up. And that's certainly something that I try to do with everyone in my group, is to make sure that I put the people who work with me forward to shine, because that's how they move forward in their career. And I think it is a tough path, the clinician scientist path. There are funding challenges. It is incredibly challenging combining clinical work with research as well as a family, but it's eminently doable. And as I said at the start, I would encourage you to take time out to travel, enjoy your family. I personally believe family always comes first, ahead of everything. And I think if I look back on my time, I would say the most important thing is to follow your passion. Follow the things that inspire you the most, because if you love what you do, you'll want to get up, you'll want to do those extra hours in the evening. Because there wouldn't be a clinician researcher who does not spend most evenings or most weekends or at some point in their career working incredibly hard. And it's because we love it and we're passionate about it. And as Catherine North said this morning, it becomes completely addictive. So I would strongly encourage anyone thinking about this career path to leap into it, find out what drives you, find out what you're passionate about, and really look for those great mentors and sponsors to guide you, but always keep your eyes firmly on work-life balance and family, and find a great partner that can support you, because I have to thank my husband David extraordinarily for always valuing his career as much as mine. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margie, for an excellent talk. We have few minutes for questions. Now, I might just kick off with one from the web and that on the chat, and that was, Margie, so much of your work has been on areas that are major issues in low and middle income countries. How does the experience of research differ in these contexts?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And look, I didn't have time to go into a lot of the research that I'm doing in the region, in the Western Pacific region. But of course, this work is absolutely critical in low and middle income countries. And from a clinician scientist perspective, for me, it's been difficult because I haven't wanted to leave as you can see, I've got 4 kids from little and now they're all big. That was only a couple of weeks ago on the right, me looking very tired from too much Zooming. I haven't wanted to travel too much away from them, so I haven't been able to do as much global child health work as I would like. But that's certainly an area that I will step into more now as my kids are older, because this work is critical. It is in fact the low and middle income settings where vaccines are not used effectively the most, and I'm certainly working very closely with WHO and other public health groups to improve that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for such an incredible talk. I'm just wondering how your views and sort of that balance between, so usually you heard a lot about clinician scientists work in the wet lab and, the actual research. Can you hear now? But you really took that jump into the social aspect and the humanities aspect of medicine. And I'm just wondering what your views are in those 3 areas, where you've got clinical work, you've got, I guess, doing a lab, doing whether it's clinical trials or wet lab, but also the humanities side of medicine, and sort of what you got from that third side.
So the third side in terms of
humanities and social science of medicine, like the policies and that.
Yeah, that's right. So in the last 5 years, I have embraced the social and behavioural science aspect of research, and it's been an absolute joy for me because it brings in, science communication and behaviour change. And if you think about the pandemic, the one thing that we've struggled with the most is adherence with public health policies and behaviour change. And now we're seeing the same with vaccine uptake. People need to go and get vaccinated and make that decision. Unfortunately, funding bodies don't provide as much funding and don't necessarily value social and behavioural science as much as, say, lab-based science, or what some people refer to as more hard science. But I do think that's changing. And for me, you know, I love all aspects of vaccine-related research trials, as well as the social acceptance and social behavioural aspects. So for me, it's been an absolute joy to be able to do both and to step into this space, and also to work with researchers from many other different fields. I work with other social scientists, political scientists, you know, infectious diseases researchers like Alan, who's speaking after me next. So it's an incredible space to be in, and it does, my clinical work directly informs what we're doing in this space and the interventions that we're developing and trying to trial. And of course, that does have a big impact on policy. And I didn't speak about that aspect of my work, but we do quite a bit of work around evaluation of immunisation policy as well.
Hi, a question. Thank you so much for your insight and wisdom. Just wanted to ask, I was really interested about what you said about fact reshaping, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on, I guess, approaching conversations with people who don't necessarily have the facts, I guess, down pat.
Yeah, so that's what we do every week in our immunisation clinic, is talk to people who are hesitant about vaccines, or who, you know, sometimes believe in conspiracy theories or are actively spreading misinformation. And what I can tell you is the most important thing about vaccine communication is it's as much how we communicate as what we say, because people will be receptive to what you're saying if they trust you and they think that you're credible, and they sort of disable, if you like, their fright and flight response, and actually receptive to what you're saying. So that's really about understanding what the key concerns are and really listening, active listening, acknowledging, asking permission to share information, and always coming back to the disease. So I think we tend to focus so much on the risk and the concerns about vaccines that people lose sight of why we're actually wanting to vaccinate. And then the most powerful thing we can do with vaccines is to make a positive recommendation to have the vaccine. And coming from a healthcare provider, that really has the, you know, the greatest potential to change someone's mind. So, and that's sort of, I suppose, how you reshape people's beliefs, by gaining their trust and by providing them with factual information, and yeah, really sort of engaging them in that way. Come and sit in an immunisation clinic with me and you can come and listen.